I'm going to ask all of you to there's water in the back. If anybody gets thirsty or overcome, make sure you have plenty of water today. I can't help my best mommy behavior, so it's just what is. We're going to get started so that we have time for you to listen and maybe even have some time to have some, if Cheryl's all right with it, some questions for her since we didn't get time earlier. The directions I'm to give to the panelists is they're going to speak for about 5 minutes. There's a young man sitting here who's going to hold up time cards for you so you know how much time you have. If they're not large enough, we will call in an eye doctor. There we go. I don't have a crook, but I'll just stare nastily at you. No. I know, it'll be really hard. Yeah, I'm not good at that stuff, but okay. The couple of questions we asked them ahead of time, and they probably prepared some reflections on this, but I'm going to read them to you just briefly as you reflect on the history of EDS. How has it shaped your identity and vocation? They don't have to answer all these questions. They might want to just reflect on what Cheryl shared this morning and renewed our activity of hope. The key elements of spirituality of resistance for you going forward, your pressing concerns facing the community today, facing the larger church and theological education, and what is your hope? In what creative ways might EDS live on in the future? And I'm going to moderate this, but I'm going to try to keep as quiet as I can and just let them talk, but if they go on too long, then I will interrupt. Is that fair? Everybody good? All right. I just need to let you know that Cheryl and I just had a conversation about when I was her student. I was extraordinarily pregnant, if you can call it that, with my third child. I don't think I fell asleep in your class.
But you couldn't lay down either.
No, but I did, Dan Stevick, I had to take Constitution and Canons in the evening. And I had a classmate who had to sit next to me and pinch me if I started to go down for the count. So I had Cheryl as a faculty member, but she at that time was Christian Ed director for the diocese on youth and young adults, so we did a lot of work together in other ways and have over the past multiple years since I've been graduated, and I'm thrilled that she's here with us and that we have time to listen to their reflections. So I'm just going to start in alphabetical order, if that's all right with you. And so that leaves up to Norm Elliott, and there should be a microphone right there for you. Marvin Elliott, Norm Elliott, somebody else. Ellison.
Oh, okay.
Now I'm really getting affected by my brain.
All right, thank you. And again, thank you for this very kind invitation to include me these important days at EDS. I'm so grateful that I'm here. I'm a bit sad that by being here, I'm not at Union, where Union is celebrating today its commencement with the class of 2017. But having said that, I'm really delighted to be here. And again, thank you for this invitation to join this panel. Well, like Cheryl, I will quote Octavio Paz, who in a very helpful way said, "We are not just living in a time of change, we are living in a change of times." And the language I would use is not so much cultural collapse as cultural crisis, because we're also seeing too many things that are getting further entrenched rather than collapsing, like the further globalization of corporate capitalism and what that global restructuring is pressuring in all the levels of our lives together, not only economic, but political, cultural, spiritual, and so forth. So we are living in tumultuous times that will not be resolved soon, and certainly not in our lifetime. So that tumult is not only spread throughout our culture and globally, it's of course something we're experiencing within theological education. It is a time of deep restructuring and great uncertainty about how things will turn out. Prediction, you may have also heard that within this next decade, a third of ATS, the Association of Theological Schools, accredited seminaries will either close or be radically restructured in some form or another. So what's happening at EDS and what happened at Bangor, Andover Newton, Philadelphia Lutheran, Gettysburg, and so forth will continue. We are only seeing, I think, the beginning of this movement. So two questions that I also travel with that I'm not going to answer, but just to put out some questions in the spirit that Cheryl offered, also citing poet Adrienne Rich, her suggestion that we pay attention to these questions: from whence comes our strength? With whom do you stand? And I think those questions are deeply spiritual theological questions and ones that we need to sit with both personally and institutionally. I want to talk about union for a few minutes because union, as I experience it, lives in that tension between paying attention to institutional stability, vitality, and survival, and how its energy as an institution helps to equip and support and further the movement toward deepening more just, peaceful, and compassionate communities. But like other theological schools and like EDS, Union has had to deal and is still dealing with two fundamental structural challenges that most of our seminaries are faced with and are managing to various degrees, either well or not so well. One of those challenges has to do with aging facilities and deferred maintenance, and the drain on resources from the institution to care for those buildings. This is also, of course, a reality in many of our parishes and congregations. The estimate for Union in doing necessary repairs to its external facade, which is mandated by the City of New York for safety reasons, because a co-ed at Columbia a few years ago was killed by a piece of falling building. The facade work of Union's 100-plus-year-old buildings, to do those repairs alone, are estimated at somewhere between $35 and $40 million. To do an entire campus renovation brings the bill up to $100 million. The endowment is $120. So it's that challenge that the trustees at Union are trying to face creatively by entering into a creative real estate deal to sell air rights and build a residential tower and so forth and so on that you may have heard about. And the reason the trustees are going that direction is in order to then have an endowment that will not be drained by the needs of the physical plant and can be directed to support programs, personnel, and above all, student scholarships. Because the other big crisis in theological education is the burgeoning student debt crisis. And so if you can't address these two issues, you're really hard pressed. But having said that, I would hope Union as an institution is concerned not only with stabilizing the institution, but being very much a part of the movement to reimagine church, ministry, theological education that is justice-centered and accountable to marginalized communities, not only here in the U.S., but globally. And just very quickly, three things just to mention. One of the ways Union is trying to live out its justice commitments is the seminary has recently declared itself a sanctuary seminary and joined that sanctuary movement. And we can talk more about what's the challenge and opportunity in that commitment. A second change at Union that I think offers great opportunity as well as distinct challenges is an enlargement of the Master of Divinity program to include, in addition to its current programming, MDivs for Muslim students and MDiv program for Buddhist students. Coming out of Union's work as a faculty over the last 5 to 10 years to intentionally focus on interreligious engagement. And out of requests from both Buddhist and Muslim communities for seminary training for their leadership, Union is stepping up to make that modification, which I think is very exciting. One of the things I would say is I was a graduate student at Union in the late 70s, returning to be on staff 3.5 years ago. One of the things I have noticed is that back when I was a student at Union, it was a white seminary with some faculty and students of color. But today, Union is much more a multiracial, multi-religious seminary. And there are not many pathways, as you know, for what it means to live out of that reality, that commitment. And so it's part of the reason I am so deeply excited about a deeper connection between EDS and Union, because I think among your assets, one of the most important gifts that you offer is having lived so deeply with the integration of anti-racist, anti-oppression, multicultural commitments and values in such a vibrant way and with such integrity. And I think many at Union will see in you not only kindred spirits, but companions on that journey, and will need to listen and learn from you about how Union can do better, living out those commitments that we both share. Perhaps the last thing I will say is my conviction is one of the best ways to convey the distinctiveness of EDS and its ongoing legacy is through the vitality and strength of its alumni network. And I think we're at the beginning of figuring out how to make connections between the Union Alum Network and the EDS Alum Network, but I am persuaded that is the key to our partnership. And the contributions that together we can make in the transformation, I think we share a deep desire for a radically different church and world. And I know we have much work to do. I so appreciate Dorothée Zola's, the title of her small collection of poetry, Revolutionary Patience. I think we're going to need to be patient with each other and give each other space, including what Cheryl was talking about as a courageous space, not just a courageous space. So I want us to have ample patience with each other, but I want to also be revolutionary and as radical as possible. Let's get on with it when and if and how we can. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marvin. Marvin, again, I apologize for scrambling your name. Marvin met with the Alumni Executive Committee over the past few days before we attended commencement and has been part of everything we've been doing these past few days, and has been very compassionate about us working together, and brought me a sense of renewed hope and expectation. Although Marvin is going to be also transitioning and retiring this summer, I know the folks who are following in his footsteps and those he will still be encouraging and working with us to make sure this conversation is a broad and lively conversation. So thank you, Marvin. Norm Faramelli, you are next up, and you are the PDS class of '60. Some of you heard Norm last night, but I hope that you'll share with us. He has great insights, so thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Cheryl, it's great to have you back at EDS. It's wonderful. My overall response to your presentation was, wow. And as you were speaking and talking about Jesus and the marginalized, I was thinking of Howard Thurman's work on Jesus and the disinherited, and how that is so relevant today. But I'd like to have us think now in terms of resistance, hopeful creativity, and also spiritual cultivation. Think of the triangle of the Trinity, of arrows going both ways in each direction. One of them has to do with spiritual cultivation, and I would put a big emphasis upon Bible study and this liturgy and developing the communal life. The other one is on resistance, to stop bad things from happening. And the third one is on hope for new possibilities. All of these are connected. You know, in any given congregation, even if it seems to be homogeneous in terms of racial makeup and socioeconomic backgrounds, you have an enormous diversity in terms of views on social issues. And with that in mind, we have to have a common core of biblical studies and also the resistance and working on creative alternatives like the Fight for 15, working on immigrant rights, working on specific things that'll bear fruit. They interact one another and help our congregation understand that there can be new possibilities, and to help people understand what the religious tradition is about. We have to also develop some vision of a common ground. This is what Howard Thurman talked about, a common ground, a common good. Call it what you please. When you mention liberation for all forms of oppression, put an emphasis, you mentioned this, understanding creation as part of this, that eco-justice and the universe and the marginalized, all of these go together because we do to nature what we do to people, and we also do to people what we do to nature. This is part of it. I like your idea of theological education for all. And as one who doesn't have an iPhone or a laptop, I still know the value of new technology. And EDS has done a wonderful job in terms of distance learning. Absolutely. And it has great gifts to take to Union Seminary. And I would hope that one of the things we talk about is theology for the laity as well as the clergy, and not do it in a two-track system. And it could be done in a lot of different ways. Warren Ratke and I were a part of a group who at that time we were working as church consultants, who were trying to understand bivocational ministry. And when we looked at bivocational ministry, we found all of the stuff written about it had to do with clergy, how you can be a bivocational clergy person. What it didn't talk about is the bivocational congregation. Because if you have a bivocational clergy in a congregation that has a mindset for a full-time rector, we start off with difficulties right at the outset. And it's necessary, if we're talking about new configurations and new forms, We have to work out a new kind of compatibility between clergy and lay, and I would hope that theology for all would be one way to get at this. I think it's very, very important. We also have to understand the strengths and the limitations of having clergy working part-time. I've done it many years, and I can tell you there are a lot of downsides as well as upsides. But one of the things we don't want to do is have congregations back into it because of financial constraints. This is the worst way to get into it. The best way to do this is for a congregation to look at itself. And we did find some congregations, not many. Most of the congregations we actually interviewed had part-time people, but they had a full-time mindset, which is a very different thing. So these are some of the things that I take away from your excellent presentation. We don't have time to go into many more, but I really believe that these are some of the things that EDS can bring to Union, and having a very strong biblical basis for our congregation can help people understand why both resistance and hope for new alternatives are both so essential. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. I am so grateful for you to be here with us and share your tremendous insight, so thank you. Cheryl, you're up next, and you get to respond to yourself, I guess.
I'd actually it'd be easier if I.
Okay, you want to go?
I just talk for an hour and a half.
Okay, so
So
we'll let you listen.
I'll
Okay, we're
listen.
going to let Cheryl listen, and I'm not going to say it right. Is it Hoy?
Toy.
Toy. Would you like to go next then? Thank you. And she just graduated yesterday. We're very proud of this graduating class.
I'm so grateful and very proud to be an EDS alum and to participate this event. And I'm very grateful for Cheryl, Dr. Kujawa Hardbrook's presentation and her wonderful questions. My purpose for coming to Episcopal Divinity School was very simple. I thought I came here to simply study the Word of God. I couldn't imagine, one, in Burma, Myanmar, how my life would change at EDS. Any expectations that I have were turned upside down. I realized that before I came to EDS, my identity and vocation was shaped by my society and cultures. Since I grew up in a male-dominant society, I was familiar with only one dominant voice and perspective. There was and is little respect, acceptance, and recognition of different voices, especially from women, in our family, church, and society. Without questioning my identity and vocation, I was very comfortable with my role as minister in the Christian Baptist Convention, since ordination is only available for straight males. EDS has helped me to discover my own identity, vocation, and voice. EDS has given me the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to struggle with the clerical challenges in the KBC. Since I came to EDS, I have become more aware of my neighbor and myself. The EDS causes, chapel worship, library, student launch, EDS campus, 11C St. John's apartment, and beloved community all have opened my eyes to see and opened my heart and my mind to notice and experience difficulties, problems, challenges, oppression, and injustice in the world. My time at EDS has caused me to weep for the injustice and many layers of oppression in my family, in my church, in my country. EDS has helped me to ask the question, How do I respond to injustice in the world? How can I restore the broken relationship in my society doing the work of God, God's mission of justice? This has not only made me aware of social injustice, but also helped me to work cooperatively and collaboratively. EDS has helped me understand, as an ethnic minority woman, that I'm one of the oppressed by all forms of oppression, especially sexism and clericalism. At the same time, I can also be a liberator, one who liberates the marginalized, the oppressed, and the exploited, particularly those who do not even know they are being oppressed. Although I'm a stranger in this country, the EDS community has embraced me and welcomed me as a child of God. I feel safe, even though the policies and the current government administration of the U.S. has become a threat for immigrants and refugees. The feeling of safety makes me know I belong to this community, and I am a member of this EDS family. Even though I'm away from my country, EDS helped me to make a connection to my home village, church, and country, seeing social, economic, and political conflicts and the oppression that occur within and outside the church on many levels: personal, interpersonal, culture, and institutional. EDS has transformed my unaware heart to become more compassionate and to do the work of God's justice. EDS has made me aware of my hunger for justice, equality, and peace in my society through feeding my intellectual interest, spiritual hunger, and with the friendship of this beloved community. I am sure that standing for my identity and vocation will be very difficult because it is very risky and presents many challenges that I must face. I have from my inner voice that I'm afraid of being excluded from my community, having negative responses, and being expelled from my church. For instance, if I talk about equal ministry, in particular, women's ordination. But EDS has shown me by example of how to live and give and receive compassion. Despite facing hard times themselves, the EDS faculty, staff, and all the students, DL, TL, and alum students have supported me in my growth and are supporting each other as we move forward to encounter the world. Since EDS has planted the seed to love justice and equality and peace in my heart, I will be faithfully cultivating it to grow and bear fruits for the whole people of God wherever I go and whatever I do. EDS has helped me to stand for the powerless and the marginalized people. I believe I can't do this work alone. And my hope is to work interreligiously to build a just and equal society within the church and wider society. Thank you very much.
Jim Merritt was one of our award winners last night, and for the Sue Hyatt Award, first 10 years, and so I'm looking forward to hearing your reflections, and I know we all are. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In true EDS style, let me say that I am aware of my intent and my potential impact. I came to EDS in 2006 after having been an ordained Southern Baptist minister since the age of 18. I remember my 2 interviews with Larry Wills, first for the MDiv and then for the DMin. And I said to Larry that day, I think I'm on the right track now. I need somebody like you to convince me. Do you remember that? Yes? And boy, did you ever. So I came to EDS at a time when I was very involved in social justice work, primarily around LGBT political concerns and marriage equality. And I was the former president of the Gay and Lesbian Caucus for the Florida Democratic Party, and I was on the board of National Stonewall, and any queer organization within the Democratic Party in the country, either my husband Al or I have probably been on the board, but it was always connected to my faith. So I chose EDS after looking at the website and being referred here many times. I saw a picture on the website of Ed Rodman, and I said to Al, I have to know this man. And that was really the selling point. I had to come and study with Ed Rodman, and I'm really so glad that I had the opportunity to be his student and in some ways colleague and friend, and I'll always cherish that relationship. Many of the experiences of EDS over the past 10 years mirror the current situation in metropolitan community churches, where there has been a tremendous struggle for power and control, where people who hold on to votes and power seem to turn a deaf ear to people like me who want to have input and want to contribute to a positive future for both organizations. I can't tell you how many times I've written letters and made phone calls and either given money or refused to do so, only to receive no response. And so I understand that experience both from a EDS world and from a metropolitan community church world. It has been very disheartening. And today, I don't want you to take my strong voice as an indication that I don't care, because I am as deeply hurt by what has happened here as I am determined to continue into the future. My primary concern through all of this has been for the faculty at EDS, because I was finished with my work here by the time it really began to take shape. But I remember coming here as a student who hadn't written an academic paper in nearly 17 years. And Gail Yee can certainly attest to that, and she taught me how to do it all over again. I also came in with a lot of help from Aura in the library. I said, help. I also came here in desperate need of reworking my own spirituality. I didn't understand the God that I had been trained to comprehend. That God didn't speak to me and didn't seem like a God that I could commit myself to. And I'll always remember Pui Lan and her gentle nurturing and example, and leading me into studies of Buddhist work, and finally to going to Plum Village to do meditation with Thich Nhat Hanh, and the way all of that changed my life and the way I practice spirituality even today. And I love quoting Larry Wills, the Jewish New Testament scholar in Pensacola, Florida, where they just spin their heads when I say that. So my biggest concern in my activism here over the past several years has been that this faculty was well cared for, and that they had a place to be respected and honored for the way they had changed my life. And I want to say in true Reverend Mother style how much I love every one of you and will always hold you in my heart for the way you impacted my life and still do through the miracle of Facebook mostly. But I was determined to stand up for the faculty, and I did it to the best of my ability. Norm, you remind me of something. My grandfather, who was a Free Will Baptist preacher on the weekends, was also a mechanic during the daytime. And so he was an early pioneer of bivocational ministry, and often was paid by the church in the form of fruits and vegetables. And, I'm a vegetarian, but he ate meat, so they would bring him like hams and stuff like chickens and things. I would want the live version if it were coming to me. But in terms of the future, because giving a preacher who's been at it as long as I have 5 minutes is dangerous. But in terms of the future, it all feels to me very uncertain. I'm not certain about my denomination. I'm really not. I'm not certain about really what's going to happen at EDS. I heard someone from a distance say a while ago at the end of the lunch, none of this is going to happen. And I don't know that none of this is going to happen, but I certainly have that worry. But I also know that uncertainty is the space in which the Holy Spirit moves most freely. And for me, I came to a place a long time ago where it didn't matter whose umbrella I did the work that I was called to do under. That God called me to be a social justice pastor, even in Pensacola, Florida, which is really South Alabama. That God called me to stand up for marriage equality. That God called me to stand up for the oppressed. That God called me to use my white male privilege, as queer as it is, to provide or help ensure a voice for somebody who didn't have one. And so although uncertain, it really doesn't change what I do, and it doesn't change what you do either, because you're called too. And so finally, my biggest fear is that we're going to lose touch. I'm worried that I won't see you all again after this afternoon. Some of you, and you mean the world to me. But through the use of technology and the internet and iPhones, Norm, I have an Android, so we're kind of in the same boat. We can stay in touch, and we really can still change the world. And so, Cheryl, I appreciated your lecture and all you had to say, and just recognize the struggle on so many different levels that causes me to say, I shall not be moved.
Thank you so much. Cheryl, would you like to entertain questions now from this morning, or what would you like to do?
We'll do questions. I think from the panelists, I just have a couple comments.
Thank you.
And then we'll go ahead. I wanted to hear what people had said, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation anymore. I already talked for an hour and a half, and I think we need to model that this is sort of, again, as Christopher would say, a multivocal problem and response. It's not, there isn't, we do have patterns, and we do have some sense of what happens with seminary closures and what doesn't happen. So we do have some data on that, but it's not as if there's a recipe for going forward. That's contextual, and that depends upon a variety of factors, and a lot of it depends upon the ability of a place like this to carry the ethos forward and to think about institutional things enough to be able to flourish in another environment. And I think when I heard at lunch, I think the lack of clarity about the process exacerbates the fear. And I think that, and I'm not involved in, those conversations at all, but I know from my own experience in being, in relationship with, I'm not really actually any popular, well-funded institutions. I've never been particularly interested in me, so I only know about places like this. And I do think, communications, community building, movement building, those kinds of skills that increase solidarity actually, is the kind of leadership going forward that will help us. I don't think secrecy ever works. I think it actually builds distrust, or at the very least, people feel patronized, and then that gets us out to an unhealthy start, which we have to overcome. So that's a lot of what I heard. I do this, and I don't know the answer to the question I asked during the talk. Can a place like this survive? What Marvin said about the cost structure is something that I live with every day. You know, do we really need to fix that? Oh, it's falling in on people. Maybe we should. But we need the money for other things. So it is, the costing of this, this is very, very precious education. It always was. We always knew emotionally, but in term, contextually and institutionally, it's getting even more complicated. And one of the things I have found, and I didn't put it in the talk because it would have done yet another, gone in another direction that is related, but not necessarily meant to be an emotional or an intellectual response to what we're doing here. But what I've picked up in recent years about the history, for instance, or the development of philanthropy. I was talking to Bishop Gates a little bit about it when we were in line. You know, philanthropy has completely changed, and the people that gave us these things, they're gone. And we actually haven't replaced them with new fabulously wealthy people who are interested in this kind of ministry. So we spend a lot of time, or at least I've spent a lot of time in my work, so we could have students like this convince people to make ourselves palatable to people that don't necessarily have the heart for this work in the way that we do. So I think one of the things going forward, you know, and one of the things that interests me, and I wasn't even going to be a dean again, famous last words, but, you know, we hired a president of color, and then the structural impact goes even higher, because even fewer people, fabulously wealthy people, are willing to give him money, right? And so the cycle perpetuates itself. So I think we that are interested in movements, we need to think about, you know, those strategies. I need to give more of my money, what there is. I need to earmark more of what I leave behind. I, you know, don't have the capacity of some of the other people, but in terms of evangelism, we need to talk to audiences beyond those of us we already know, because this kind of education, to keep it going and to keep it available for people, really does depend upon our capacity to do that. And we've neglected it a long time. And there's a whole generation, I think, we weren't developing people that could help fund us. And while, you know, that is not necessarily what I went in here to do, you know, sort of as Jim says, you know, with all these degrees and being white and stuff, maybe that's what I'm supposed to start thinking about doing. Maybe I can think about people, if I want these students to have this opportunity, I have to do different things. And one of them is philanthropy. Every school like this I know is struggling with that. The other struggle is governance. The educational statistics are such, and my anecdotal in my head following seminary closures, the faculty takes the hit every time. And I cannot tell you how I'm pissed about what happens to my friends, right? The other thing, though, is sort of, it like makes no sense in terms of resource allocation and what we're about. These precious resources are being turned loose, and we're not supporting people in the pipeline to come after them. I mean, I go to academic meetings, I'm one of the young ones, and I'm going to be 61 years old, okay? We've got, where's Matthew? Dr. Cadwell. I mean, we do not structurally support people to be the teachers in the future, and we're cutting loose the ones we have. So that tells me two things. One is the predictions of American higher education in general, not just theological education, is that we're going to be moving a generation from now with a handful of elite places that are out of touch, you know, that are not affordable by the general public, and then growing masses of people where higher education isn't obtainable at all because of the cost. And if we care about all those constituencies, we need in general to think also about that kind of work and how do we raise up the next generation of people to do this. One of the excuses in seminary closures is always, and I get it now too, because if you have white hair, people assume that you want to retire, but it's only generative if that's your choice. Forced retirements actually not only rob the community of important resources, but I think also, is yet another oppressive gesture towards people that have given a lot to a community over a long time. I'm fortunate. This was my first career, such as it is, and I'm going to live it out, because I don't know the answer to the question. I only know it's important to be engaged in the process till I can't anymore. But I'm fortunate. I have a pension. The people behind us aren't even going to have that to the extent we have it. So I think about you, and I think about those next generations that won't have this.
Thank you. We have about 10 or 12 minutes for questions. Catherine, could you help me pass the microphone around? We have another microphone back there. Okay. You want to? Okay.
Hi. Can you hear me?
No.
I don't know how to use it.
We can hear you.
There you
Webb.
go. I am Webb Brown. I graduated in '91, and I want to pick up on the last few comments about faculty. And I don't know what the context is for the final Eucharist that's coming up, but I'd like to take this moment to express my gratitude as a student who graduated in '91 for the faculty who impacted my life beyond measure. That would be Carter Haywood, Sue Hyatt, Katie Cannon, who was so much a part of this institution, and so many others. And so I want to raise up those folks, Frederica. And I also want to take a moment to say thank you to the faculty who are here right now. To Puilan, please stand. To Gail Yee, please stand. To Larry Will, please stand. Angela Bauer, please stand. Joan Martin, please stand. And to all the supportive staff and faculty who have been such an important part of the last several years in this moment of this next life of whatever is going to happen. So my heart is very full to overflowing. And I thank you one and all for your current, continued, and deep love for Episcopal Divinity School.
Webb, thank you. And for everybody, we do have an interpreter, so if you could make sure you're speaking clearly and succinctly and not moving around too much, that would be really helpful. Just thank you.
Everybody gets a little nervous when I get a microphone. I came into this panel this afternoon feeling like I needed a shower, and I'm really so grateful to all of you for speaking. It seems like this day has been being torn apart and put back together and torn apart and put back together. And Cheryl, you certainly helped put me back together this morning, and then you folks have helped do it again. So thank you for sincerely. What I have to say is left over from this morning, from your talk, Cheryl. It's a comment, a confession, and a question. The comment is that I heard you saying that hope requires action and a willingness to be transformed, that we need to bring everyone in and leave no one out, and to love your neighbor as yourself. That's what I got. Now, here's the confession. I have difficulty, I'm speaking for myself, and I hope you will forgive me. Did they turn the microphone off? I have difficulty seeing the Imago Dei in Donald Trump and his friends. And most days I flirt with the word hate for truly the first time in my life. Given these two realities, I find myself endeavoring. They turn it off.
Two other microphones are converging on you, then, there we go.
Hello? Okay. Given these two realities, that I have trouble seeing the imago Dei in our president, and I flirt with the word hate, I find myself endeavoring to love the man and hate his policies. And I am mindful that this sounds eerily like love the sinner, hate the sin. So my question is, what is your advice, and indeed any of the panelists' advice to us, to help us keep working for justice and keep justice alive by loving our neighbor as ourselves without falling victim to the fallacy of relying on hate to fuel our work for justice?
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I think you've named for me what is one of the hardest spiritual struggles of this era. But then when I start feeling hate creeping up on me, I have to say to myself, then I become what I have most hated. I don't want to become hate. I don't want to be sucked into that energy. And so what is then the response? And I think, anyway, for me, it is to try to look at the issues systemically, try to look at them culturally, try not to personally demonize, because that's sending the same energy out. But that to me doesn't mean I don't have boundaries, doesn't mean I don't have standards, doesn't mean that I make myself vulnerable to being hurt in that process. But I do think that there is a way and I think it's a spiritual discipline, to stand with integrity in difficult situations without being reactive and fear-mongering and hateful. And so that's the kind of energy and discipline I try to cultivate, and I do think it's a spiritual discipline. I think it involves meditation and prayer and solidarity because I think literally the identities of who we want to be in the world is at stake and is endangered, right? And so that's, I don't have a definitive answer to your question, but that's the way I deal with it and choose to deal with it in the world. In places like this, it is almost compounded to me because in other, situations or dealing, I mentioned before that governance is a problem. So I'm the dean. I have to go back when, governance is disconnected from who we are, and I have to try to work with people who don't appreciate what I do or who don't necessarily want to learn. I feel they don't want to learn what I do, or evaluate it based on standards that do not correlate with what the discipline is. So how to, and that's one of the things I talked about in the talk, but how do I create a courageous space where I learn how to respond in those kind of situations? Because sometimes with adversaries, protecting is a legitimate response. Sometimes I have to just put my body in front of something and protect. And sometimes I have to use moral suasion, and sometimes I have to use intellectual acumen. So I try to, what are the skills that I have to come back with other than hate, fear, and manipulation? You know, what is the tool set that I can use? Because I think in creating the environment, I am as culpable as other people in creating environment, whether true courageous space is possible. And then I try to cultivate the people, whether they're the faculty, and at the school I'm at now, it's mostly the faculty, but also the president and some other administrations. I cultivate those people who I will be real with you. I may have to go out of that door and, you know, operate in a different kind of a place for a while, but I have places where I am real and where people see me for who I am and actually value the parts of me that I value, and that is, I think, very important for my identity formation and staying clear in these kinds of climates. I think we do need those places that are real, and I think they're cultivated. They don't just happen.
Thank you, Cheryl.
I'll just add a quick word.
Yeah.
One of my mentors at Union, Gustavo Gutierrez.
Yes.
Can you hear me? One of my mentors at Union, Gustavo Gutierrez, at one point pointed out very helpfully that to speak about loving your enemy doesn't mean you don't have enemies, but to think about ways to engage the enemy that do not replicate the evil doing. And part of that is, how do we hold the wrongdoer accountable and insist that the harm stop and change be made? And that often is beyond our capacity as individuals. It, though, requires us to figure out how we work collectively as communities to hold each other accountable and insist on change.
I'm Bill Condrath. I taught here and ran the field ed program for 19 years, a little under a third of my life. I'm currently taking EDS out by working with Visions and also doing consulting of my own, and I'm currently working with a non-Christian faith tradition that has a board of directors and a seminary. They work eco-justice, deep spirituality, feminism. They are a wonderful complement to this school. They're struggling. What I've noticed, and I'm going to pick up on Hillary Greer's comment about DNA, what I've noticed in them, and I think is true here too, there's more than one DNA. And what I notice is there's frequently a board DNA and a faculty alum student DNA. It's not that simple because we have some alums on the board and whatnot. I have one suggestion, and then I want to raise up two people. The one suggestion is, going forward, it may be really easy to get those DNAs to come closer together by having as a high priority putting new people on the board who are alums like the people who have been organizing this event, and bringing those DNAs closer together. And there are alums with organizational development backgrounds, with fundraising backgrounds, with backgrounds particularly around good process that work toward inclusion, equity, and justice. And the two people I want to raise up that haven't been mentioned, that are part of the DNA of this school while I was here, that don't fit into any neat category, are Catherine Stiles and Suzanne Ely, who exemplify to me the best of EDS DNA that is grounded in spirituality and has incredible process skills and teach people to use their voice. And they have influenced many of the rest of us who also do that.
Thank you. We're just about at the end of our time. And I hope that you folks will find time with our panelists and with everyone here to keep the conversation going. It is not something that no matter what announcements we get over the next day or so, will really be resolved for any of us. And I hope that some of you know my history as a Native person. I am Cherokee. My mother's name was Betty Walking Sticker Woody Odanisti. And I come from a long line of resistors. And people who have had to stand up in the face of incredible prejudice and abuse, and also in my DNA is the multiple experiences of being dragged off ancient family lands. So I'm going to close with a piece that I wrote this morning. I wrote a daily blog called Mama Bishop. And the reason why I call it Mama Bishop is because when the first women went to Lambeth, Barbara included, some of the bishops yelled at them, "Mama, go back and take care of your babies." So instead of it being a negative thing, I wanted to make it a positive thing. And so I write a daily reflection on the gospel of the day. So the stories today are about the woman who is healed from her bleeding condition and the little girl who's dying. And so I offer this as a prayer as we wrap up. Before I do that, I have been given instructions here. There are flavored water. There's flavored water and cookies are available outside at the front of the chapel during this time. You're asked not to go into the tent because they're trying to set up for the reception after the Eucharist. Also, they'll need the chapel space so they can set up for the Eucharist. But you're invited to visit the historical interactive exhibit at the rear of the chapel, and our Eucharist will begin at 4 p.m. I'm also going to encourage you to go over to Tyler. There's lots of swag left, so we want you to take some physical memories with you as well, and some things that you can hold close while we go through this massive transition. And so I hope that you'll avail yourself of that, and there'll be folks over there to help you with that. So I close with this, is just entitled Sick and Dying, Healing and Rising. My human eyes can only see the grave, the ashes scattered, and the mourning. My human heart can only despair and weep as glorious things come to an end. I was forever changed by so many, turned around and transformed here. This place of learning will be no more, yet no one can take what is in my heart. They will rise again and stand up. They will resist the wilting diseases. They were committed to a loving God, and their loving God will hold them fast. Creator, as we sorrow at these endings, may we know you hold the future close. Life beyond this grave is surely coming. Love beyond measure is coming to stay. Amen. Thank you all. Wait, could you come up and use the microphone, Bill, please? Thank you.
So I thought this EDS crowd would keep going a little bit longer, but I don't have any official word yet, so as soon as I do, I'll find a way to start getting it out. One way or another, there will be, certainly later today, a public press release announcement that will get out and tell the story. And then one of the intentions we do have is, as soon as possible, to put on our website and to get out to you in other ways a set of questions and answers, including frequently asked questions that you have made to us. And the final thing I want to say is that, you know, part of my role as the interim president has been to listen. And sometimes it's been hard to listen because I know all the pain and difficulty you're going through, but nevertheless, that's part of my job. And I take then, no matter what's said, take that back to part of what you said so eloquently a different part of the DNA at this place so we can eventually begin to bring those DNAs together. God bless you all, and I'll try to bring you up to date as soon as I can.
Thank you. Again, please avail yourself of water and cookies and visit and embrace one another in this day. Thank you.